Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to the second part of my year-ending supporter spotlight. I've got 5 games for you in this one. Some of them are reasonably short games, so although it's going to be about the same length of video, more or less, as the Warships one, that I only managed to get 2 games in because one of those Warships games was quite long. It's just the nature of the thing. You get more bang for your buck for the same amount of minutes in a video, I suppose, with World of Tanks. So this is you in the T25 to start with, and he's top tier, which is pretty damn nice. He's also in a platoon with a T3485M, and that thing top tier, you know, the extra frontal armor that it has is actually worth something. So although it's not quite as good as a heavy tank, it's still not too shabby. And as you can see, well, they've both been able to just advance down this eastern flank on Ensk, all the way almost to the enemy base before seeing any enemies, because the vast majority of the enemy team has just gone into the town. So this might actually be a nice opportunity to get some flanking in. Bit of a duff shot there with that second on the autoloader, but I mean, if they get the chance to come up behind this big cluster of enemy tanks, having an autoloader is going to be especially useful, and having a platoon mate is going to be especially useful, because they'll be able to distract the enemies whilst you're reloading. So whilst he's advancing and missing a looks, I'm going to take this opportunity, this moment, to say a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters over this last year and just previous years, and people that aren't even supporting me anymore, people that maybe supported me only for a short time because that's all they could afford. You know, it's all absolutely continued to make this a viable job, especially in light of what's been happening with demonetization and YouTube over this past year as well. And in fact, over the last couple of weeks, like 3+ weeks at this point, almost every video I have had that I've uploaded has been demonetized at some point. So I'm getting maybe only half the ad revenue that I would normally get at this time of year, because, you know, in theory December's supposed to be quite a good month for advertising revenue from YouTube, but not so much this time round. And I know other channels have been getting pretty much the same thing, you know, practically every video gets demonetized. So Patreon has become more important than ever. So this is one of the reasons why, you know, I was giving my reasons yesterday why I'm doing this kind of, you know, at the end of the year as opposed to regular videos, but that's another very good reason why. It's just as a thank you to my Patreons, because otherwise I'd have to go back on the dole and look for an actual proper job, and then probably end up spending another 2+ years searching fruitlessly, because the job market on this island is not very good. So anyway, back to the game. You has racked up over 1,000 damage at this point. Is Radio Man still knocked out, because that hit he took from I didn't even see if it was the Swedish TD or the KV-1 with the derp gun, but either way it knocked out 2 of his 4 crew members, even though it didn't do a lot of damage. And the Radio Man being the least important in this particular instance, well, they just have to stay knocked out for a bit. Now, most of the enemy team managed to knock out most of Yu's team, but him and Rubber Boots have been able to just come up behind, hoover up a bunch of kills, and there's just been a terminal lack of coordination among the enemy team in terms of just taking them down. They could easily have been able to mob them just through sheer weight of numbers, but instead they all splintered, they all fractured. Some of them went chasing after the ELC. Others of them have just gone driving I don't know where, and that's allowed this platoon to actually be rather effective. So that's the Cheeto down, and that just leaves this KV-85, who hopefully doesn't have the 122mm, but even if they do, you can still survive the hit. But as it turns out, no, that is not the 122mm, and bam, there we go. So that wasn't terrible. 1,800 damage done. They had, I think, what, 10 kills between them, brothers in arms. Top Gun, he had 6 kills himself. And while it wasn't quite enough to put it over into an ace tanker, that was still a nice warm-up for this bumper crop of videos we've got going here. So there we go, 1,814, 6 kills, and Rubber Boots there got 1,690 with 4 kills. The rest of the team, yeah, a few people with 0 damage, but the enemy team was actually worse off in that regard. The enemy team had a fair chunk of people that really didn't do much of anything, which is another reason why they were able to walk away with the victory. So, for the next one, we have this game from Katia, WZ120, and this is a slightly older one. This is a 917 game. This is one from the archives, so to speak. And this isn't going to be a spectacular game, but there's going to be a nice bit of teamwork towards the end of it. Because Fisherman's Bay here, if there are sufficient numbers of tank destroyers and artillery, it can be really annoying trying to push the northern base, because you've got that northwest corner where all the tank destroyers can sit. And I'm sure I've had a previous game on the channel, I think it was like a mouse game, where it was a tier 10 game, obviously with tier 10 tank destroyers, and it just ended up being a draw because we couldn't root out those last couple of tanks, we couldn't cap, they couldn't really do anything to us unless they came out themselves, so it just ended up being a Mexican standoff, and therefore not really a nice time for anyone. So she's come over to this flank. She's hoping to get some spotting from this 1390, who has bravely gone forwards, as are all the tank destroyers here as well. But the Straya and the T-28 Pro, I'm not entirely sure what shots they're hoping to get from back there. That's not really an optimal position. It's not going to be effective unless those enemy tanks get a lot closer. So 1390 keeping the T-54 proxy spotted. Unfortunately for that 1390, well, there are 3 artilleries in this game. So yeah, he's keeping the T-54 spotted, but the T-54 is keeping him spotted as well. And maybe he's hoping some of his own arties will take an interest in that T-54, but they don't seem to be. The T-54 doesn't seem to be under any kind of artillery fire whatsoever. Oh, so you can see she's just been looking for an outline, and then the one moment where she does get an outline, it's just too brief to actually make a use of. Anyway, so the enemy Su-14-1 completely nails the 1390. That must have been a penetrating hit, and I think was 917. Was this before the artillery changes? Because I have a feeling it might have been before all the stun mechanics and the reduced. What patch was that now? I can't even remember. So this is about a minute later. Their own team's resistance in the town just collapsed, which is a pity because that was their tier 8 heavy tanks. I don't think either side had a... Oh, actually no, I was going to say either side had a tier 9 heavy, but the enemy team did have a T10. So there's an IS-3 steaming towards the Batchat artillery, which... yeah, they're sitting there pinging for help, but they really have no excuse for not getting out of the way. That thing is the fastest artillery at tier 10, bar none. And if you're not paying attention to the mini-map and using that mobility to get out of harm's way, then that's your own damn fault. So unsurprisingly, they are going to lose that Batchat artillery, but the IS-3 is going to go down themselves. Meanwhile, on the flank that Katia just vacated, yeah, the T-54 is now advancing, and it's also not going so well over there either, although the Skoda T-50 has gone back over to try and help out, and that Skoda is also going to be a very valuable player on this team. So we fast forwarded a little bit there as Katia advances, trying to see if there's any artillery here. And yes, there we go. There's an enemy artillery who equally has not been looking at their mini-map. And as a bonus, they've also fired. So Katia knows that she doesn't have anything to worry about in terms of being shotgunned. Although, of course, they are spotting her for the remaining 2 arties. And at least one of them... There we go, has a pop, but it's only enough to turn her tracks yellow because it's the tier 8 British, which doesn't have a lot of splash. It's probably better these days, but certainly back then it didn't have a lot of splash. So meanwhile, the Bulldog makes a bit of a hero run out over the open, which is risky, as we know that the tank destroyers are likely to be where they are, but the remaining artillery, at least, are not in that corner. They're actually behind the cap circle, so that means that at least they can take out those arties. So the HTC gets unmasked by taking a pop at the Bulldog, and there we go, Katia gets in a hit once they start showing the side armour. Of course, frontally the HTC, it does have some weak spots, but at this particular range it's not going to be the easiest. The AT-15, we also know where that is, and the ISU, we know where they were last spotted, but they weren't picked up by the Bulldog before they died. So the ISU may not still be there. So really, it's up to Katia at this point. You know that the Skoda, I think, has taken some hits, but they are in a position on that middle road to provide some fire support for her, and she's got enough hit points. In fact, she's still full health that she can survive some hits here. So there we go. There's the HTC, who is, I think, a one-shot at this point. I'm not sure the Skoda will have. Oh, there we go. Having said that, they in fact did have shots, so she was able to take it on the tracks, repaired, and still has taken no actual damage yet. So that just leaves the AT-15 and the ISU. Obviously the ISU has the more worrisome gun, but the AT-15, you know, if she got tracked coming around a corner or something, that could also be bad, because she doesn't have the repair kit anymore, and unlike newer versions of the game, it's not on a cooldown, it's just used up. So the good news is that ISU is extremely low health, and she actually is able to get the jump on him, takes a hit from the AT-15, but that thing is really only dangerous over, you know, time. And at this stage of the game, unless this AT-15 is able to ammo rack her, it's basically over at this point. So they are getting a little bit of damage in at this late stage of the game, but yeah. They actually did, I should note, they did the right thing there. They were up against a house, so she couldn't completely circle strafe them, but it didn't really matter. She could just absorb the hits and finish them off. So that was an okay game. You know, there was nothing flashy, nothing spectacular, but it was a solid top-tier medium tank game. The Skoda is going to turn out to have been the star of the show, with over 4,000 damage done, and they also had about 2,000 spotting and assistance damage as well. Katia in third place there. Somehow the GW Panther got second place. I think they must have had some pretty good luck with their shots to get that 2,700 damage, and who knows how much else assistance damage from, you know, getting tracks and things. But even so, you know, when you're in artillery, just inherently you're doing the vast majority of your damage with other people spotting for you, so that tends to eat away at your potential XP. So yeah, they did reasonably well for themselves on the team list, all things considered. So third replay, this time it's Manti111, who I think he's been more into the World of Warships. I said reships. Reships is not a thing. Why? Where did reships come from, Brain? I don't know. Anyway, but this was, I think, a replay from November. I'm struggling to remember. That's the problem when you've got multiple replays, is you're trying to remember the details from the emails for each one. And, well, you know, this is me we're talking about here, so good luck getting anything right. But this was from a foray back into World of Tanks, essentially, and the T25-2, personally, you know, I rather enjoyed my grind through it, but that was a while ago. This, however, is a pretty decent situation. He's able to sit here and use his gun depression, and he's got an IS-6 to absorb the hits for him. And they are taking some damage, this IS-6, but they're not, you know, they're angling okay, and with Manti's assistance, he's helping keep them at bay. He's already done a little bit of damage to that T55A. The gun mantle on this thing, by the way, is not terrible if you're in this kind of hull down position, but you're not going to rely on it, so it's more that he wants to fall back and not get hit. So he's just trying to bait their shots at the moment. So the IS-6 has been able to get up on the hill. We know there's a CDC around the corner as well, but they've not made an appearance at this position yet. But the enemy team don't really have enough tanks here to seriously force the issue. They don't have enough tanks to overwhelm. But nonetheless, the T55A tries anyway, and the 1375 goes down. But they are at this point just, I think, banking on being able to kill the IS-6 quickly enough that they will survive. But it's not worked out. It's a complete miscalculation. So Manti's been able to really take advantage of this. So the VK charges in, gung-ho, trying to get around, trying to get out of Manti's line of fire. There's also a Type 62 there who's having a pop. IS-6 is surviving on just 7 hit points. Manti gets the kill and saves the IS-6 just for now, but there is still a CDC. Now, with this HE, you know, it's a 90mm gun. It's only really a little step up from the Hellcat in terms of firepower, but the CDC's armor is such that with HE carefully aimed, he could easily, you know, use and pen against this CDC. But no, he's going for the safer option, which is probably sensible the vast majority of the time. It's funny when you do it against a CDC, and it's the bane of the CDC's existence that you don't even need to meet derp guns in order to be vulnerable to HE. But yeah, although it possibly would have done it in 2 shots instead of 3, it doesn't really matter. They've kind of won. I mean, they won the rest of the map. The enemy team did push up the 7-8 line, and in fact there's an M103 heading towards their base. But there's the other side, the other flank, their own team was able to just push round and overpower. And so that one M103 is just kind of irrelevant, honestly. If they deal with this flank, they can all turn around and mob that guy. So Manty's using this opportunity to get some further snipes in from the hill. See if you can break 3k damage. It's not a bad gun, this. You know, this was bottom tier, but it wasn't too badly bottom tier, and it's an okay gun. It's good enough. It's just the fact that it's, you know, a decent gun on a decently mobile machine with a turret. You know, it's just all round an okay machine. It's not particularly flashy, but it's not to be underestimated, as the enemy team found out there. So that was an ace tanker, 2.8k damage. He didn't get another hit in, unfortunately, because there was just no way he was going to get a hit on the M103. But as it was, easily top of the team, although some of the other tanks, you know, the IS-6 did all right in terms of damage, T-54 did all right, but some of the other teammates, you know, weren't that good in terms of damage. But that's true for the enemy team as well. There was a fairly sharp drop-off in terms of the damage output, so that's probably why they won that one. So for the next one, well, it might look like a new name, but it is in fact an old name, but renamed, if that makes any sense at all. I probably could have thought of a much more elegant way of saying that, but if you want elegance, especially verbal elegance, you've come to the wrong channel, really. So this is Q, which is not to be confused with You, formerly known as You Got Beat by a Girl, which she felt was just a bit clunky as a username, so instead it relates to a nickname that she's got or something. I can't remember the exact explanation for it, but it was something along those lines. Now, we have seen her before in this machine, though, the FV4005, and this time round, while this is a game where we're going to see her, yes, that's a building, achieve a particular personal record. So, her first shot against the 25 AP didn't go so well, but this time round they're sitting nice, perfectly stationary, and boop! Not quite a one-shot, but damn close. Damn near close. This is going to be a full HESH game, by the way, but what else are you expecting when you watch somebody play the FV4005? It's the same with the Death Star. It's rather unusual to see people using, you know, all AP or all HE. Sometimes you'll see people using a bit of a mix, and she does in fact have some AP shells, but no, this game is going to be all HESH. So she waits till she knows they've fired, pops out, aims a bit, and there we go, gets the penetration. Another 1600 damage done. Most of that tier 10 heavy's health. And that was, you know, that was nicely aimed. She actually aimed for where she knew it could penetrate, that turret ring area, because frontally that thing's pretty tough. If you're shooting at the front of the hull, you might have a hard time, but if you can get that turret ring area, actually it's a bit more pennable. So once again, going to have a peek, and this does result in a damage trade, but she comes off rather better. No penetration, but still over 800 damage done. Did take a hit, but yeah, that was worth it. Now, the downside of this thing is, of course, and this goes for doing replays of it as well, it's rather a long reload, so I have to think of things to say in the meantime. But yes, well, look who's turned up. It's a familiar customer. It's the Panzerkampfwagen 7, who apparently forgot that she was here, and that turned out to be a bit of a fatal mistake, didn't it? So that's another boop, and now over 4,500 damage done. If you're wondering why she's pulling out sideways like this, by the way, it does come with some risks. The principal one being that you get shot and tracked. But if you're trying to side scrape, well, I mean, in this thing, you know, you can pull back quicker, basically. when you're doing it this way. If you're trying to side scrape, it means you might be vulnerable for longer, and it's not like this has got a bouncy turret, so pulling back out of danger quickly is actually quite important. So no sign of the E3, or rather the E3 has manoeuvred. Looks like the T26E5 is going to pop out, and then doesn't, which is a bit of a tease, but okay. But you never know. She's decided to be patient, and oh, there you go, it pays off, and boop! Goodbye, 26E5. So that's one less enemy tank, and now over 1600. No, not what? 16? No, 6,000 damage. If it had been over 16,000 damage, that would be amazing, but rather improbable. You might somehow be able to do it in a grand battle, but would you even have enough ammunition? I don't think so. You'd have to... I don't even know. You'd have to just like set fires with every shot. So they are winning. She decides to go on the offensive, come out round behind this E3. Boop! And another one down. But she does take a rather more serious hit in the process from the T30. But still, that was a good trade. They've almost won this. She does, however, find out rather nastily that the AT-15 is there, and that could be a problem if she just sits out in the open and takes it. So that does now rather tie her down until her allies can deal with it. But there are still some things close by she could potentially shoot at. This T-30 and the 110. So she's loaded. They are looking the other way because her team's now starting to press from the west. And, oh, well, she might actually get a shot here. There's kind of bits of rubble in the way, but no, not all of it is actual rubble. Another one shot, another boop. Well, actually, I think somebody hit them just before, so it was only 944. But it was, you know, basically the rest of their health, so they are now dead. AT-15 gets taken out by the Udes, and 8.7k. And this is what makes this game special. Highest damage game ever. So this is the most damage she's ever done in a game. Now, clearly she was hoping to maybe get a bit more out of the surviving Stridsvagn, but she just can't get there in time. So they die, and she's left with a mere 8,700. Now, despite doing 8,700 damage, it just tells you how dangerous this thing can be, how capable. That was still only a first class. But she undoubtedly did a lot to help win that game because she just removed such a huge chunk of hit points. Even though she only had the 4 kills, she removed such a huge chunk of hit points from the enemy team that it then made her team's job comparatively much easier. So, yeah, that wasn't skulking around at the back. It wasn't shirking around in bushes. No, that was right at the forefront of the action, and it really paid off. So that was a pretty nice game. Lastly, and I have saved the best till last, we have Zebedee here in the T54 Litwit, as it is definitely called. It's not a lightweight, it clearly says there, T54 Litwit. So, you know, if you try and tell me that that's wrong, obviously you're just misinformed. And he's actually in an assault game, which is not something I get sent too many replays of, because I don't think too many people actually have it turned on. So this is a tier 9 game. He is top tier. And that's not too bad, because this thing, although, you know, it's a light tank, it still has some okay armour to it, and the turret armour especially, against these lower tier tanks. Some of the tank destroyers would still be obviously a serious problem, but some of the tier 7s and tier 8s might actually still struggle a bit, as this T43 is. So it's been able to do a bit of damage so far. This is, you know, they're on the defending side. This is a bit of an early aggressive position, and you can win it that way. You can defeat the attacking team by just wiping them out. And sometimes even just securing one flank can be a very, very useful thing. And that's probably what Zebedee had in mind here. He's not even the only one here. There's also the Udes and this KV3 who's chugged all the way down here. Now, there is an artillery in play, which might become an issue later on, but for now, they're likely to be targeting other things. Okay, that Jagdpanther's armor-wise not too tough, but you don't want to underestimate the gun, but they're not making it that difficult. They're just rushing forwards, basically. The VK that's turned up well, again, not maybe that dangerous in of itself, but still, you don't want to get complacent. However, the first damage he takes is actually a side shot from a 1390 that has pushed through to the middle. There's also a Bulldog down there as well, though, out of render. maybe just about, and there's the 1390. So he's got to be a little bit more wary. He doesn't want to just give them free damage by being here. And at this point, he actually, I'm not entirely sure why he decides right now that he's going to reposition, but he does. And so he's going to make his way back towards the cap area. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he just felt that the main press of the enemy team would come from the other side, and therefore that's where he wanted to be, because he hadn't really spotted anything else other than the tanks that they cleared out and the VK, which is obviously there still alive. And if that was the case, his hunch has turned out to be correct, because this is where the main thrust of the enemy attack is now coming from. But the enemy team are, you know, taking losses themselves in the process. But if he was coming over here thinking he'd be able to use his mobility and maybe reposition and get down underneath them, behind them, whatever, that plan has rapidly become not particularly viable, because suddenly everybody's died, just about, so it feels like. So there's about half the enemy team left alive, and there's only 5 of his team left alive. In fact, now make that 4, now that Stuart Emil is dead. So this is suddenly looking altogether less rosy. Now at this point, he's done less than 1,000 damage, he has gotten a little bit of spawning damage, he's blocked 360. So far, nothing particularly impressive. But we're not done yet. So we're just about at the halfway mark. He's setting up an ambush for the 1390, which he hopes he can take with one shot, and that his gun won't troll him and, you know, go into the ground or into the tracks or something, because sometimes the best armour French scouts have is the tracks. But as it is, the Su-14 one-blaps them, and that just leaves the T-28 Prot with a nasty gun. And knowing that he's going to be facing a Prot, he actually does load the premium. Now the first one is into the side armour, but he's now going to be able to, you know, this is not really what you want to do, face this gun at close range, although he does get the bounce. Yeah, he's able to take advantage of the turret armour profile with those triangular flat bits and just pummel them over and over. And this is where the T-28 Prot's frontal armour completely falls down, even if you're not loading Prem and penning at a distance, which a lot of higher tiers can do. And bear in mind, this has overall weaker penetration than the regular T-54 and no heat ammo, but even so, he was just easily able to... did he only... Yeah, he didn't even take a hit, I don't think, from the Prot. It was the Stridsvagen that hit him there that streamed in from behind. So yeah, he was actually able to deal with the Prot relatively easily. It was just the Stridsvagen coming in that was then the nasty surprise. So this is the comedy portion of this replay. He overshoots a little bit. The Stridsvagen is in road travel mode, so they have a terrible reload right now, but they can at least reverse backwards as quickly as they can go forwards, just about. And if he's trying to get a tracking shot on the move or something, he's not doing a very good job of it. But as it is, the Stridsvagen runs into a wall, and this is going to be a slight lack of turret problem, compounded by the fact that the enemy arty actually, I think, it didn't do a lot of damage to either of them, but it managed to stun both of them, which did not help out the Stridsvagen at all. Now all that's left on their team is an Udez, who is being mobbed down south, and this T-28 Prot. And he's going to have to work closely with this Prot if he wants to have a chance of surviving this. The good news is, though, the remaining tank destroyers are... well, the Scorpion at least is easy to hurt. The Jagdpanther 2 he shouldn't have too much trouble with unless it's hull down, at which point that superstructure will become actually quite difficult to penetrate. The other two, well, the Comet is maybe a problem if it gets to a position where it can use its DPM. Otherwise, you know, weaker penetration is not that much of an issue. And there's also the VK4503, but he's very low health. So one shot ought to do the trick. And of course, there's still artillery as well. So a bit of a snapshot at the VK, he maybe could have aimed that for a little longer, but you can understand the caution of not wanting to sit in front of that Jagdpanther 2's 128mm gun. That could be fairly nasty. The comet, by the way, hasn't actually been spotted up until this moment, so we really had no point of reference for where the comet might have been. If I had to guess, maybe sniping from the hill on the opposite side of the map, but as it is, the element of surprise doesn't really work out for the comet because Zebedee was heading his way and had his best armor towards him, and the comet isn't even firing a PCR. So yeah, so much for the DPM. It's not really working out at all, and Zebedee's actually able to just keep bumping into him and knocking his tracks off. Now, because the T-28 prot's there, he could be confident that the Jagdpanther 2 wasn't just going to come up from behind him and potentially do him a nasty, maybe even could one-shot him with that gun. You know, the Jagdpanther 2 has clearly had the same thought as the Comet, rather than just go face first into the prot. Ooh, yeah, there's artillery again. He decides, along with the VK, to actually do a little flanking maneuver, because it's a pretty mobile tank destroyer, that thing. It's on the Panther 2 hull, and that's one of the nice features about it. You've got that good gun, the good the superstructure and the casement, and a nice mobile machine. So yeah, it's a nice all-round package. So while he's been doing that, the prot has actually come forwards to try and tangle with the Jagdpanther 2, but they're coming much worse out of it, unfortunately. But this provides Zebedee the perfect opportunity to use his mobility, and oh, there we go, that was actually a good hit. And he's going to hopefully get the kill, but will it be in time? Well, I mean, we'll get the kill, but will it be in time to save the prot? And the answer is no. So we are down to less than a minute. There is just artillery, and unless this arty is brave and shows up to try and shotgun Zebedee, which he could potentially, and Zebedee's remaining health, it's a win just by running out the clock. But that was an awfully close game. You know, there were points where it seemed like they might well not do it, but he went from being less than 1,000 damage in the first 5 minutes to accumulating nearly 5,000 damage. So that's not half bad. That, along with the 6 kills, propelled him to over 1,300 base XP, which was obviously enough to get the ace tanker. And as you can see, yeah, by far and away the best player in his team in terms of damage done. But he couldn't have really done what he did at the end there without the aid of that T-28 prot. That absolutely did help him out, especially with distracting the Jagdpanther 2. Because if he'd had to try and face the Jagdpanther 2 alone, that would have been a much dicier proposition. So, yeah, I'm sure he was quite glad to come out of that one with the win. So, that's it. Hopefully you have enjoyed these 5 replays. And, yeah, just to reiterate what I said at the start, a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters for making all of this possible, and obviously also to all my viewers as well, because it's not just the paying customers, if you like, that make this channel what it is. It's all the people that stop by to, you know, spend 10-15 minutes or whatever a day enjoying themselves with my videos, because that's the whole point of me being here. Otherwise it would just be me talking to myself with nobody watching. Which is, you know, I'm sure if Caption Guy was here, he'd say that's a big element of my normal life anyway. But it's nice to, it's nice to have people, you know, appreciating what I'm doing and for the effort to feel like it's worthwhile. So yeah, a big thank you to everybody. I hope you have a good 2018. I hope your 2017 hasn't been too terrible, and I shall see you next year.